This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
China accuses U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and others of interfering in Hong Kong affairs. Spotlight on malaria as Uganda and Burundi record spike in infections. And South Sudan's rival parties due to meet in Ethiopia in a bid to salvage latest peace deal. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Cyril Nsah, live in Nairobi. And for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at other stories making headlines this hour. In business, global investors dump stocks amidst fears of a looming global recession. And in sports, Liverpool add on to their UEFA Champions League title by beating Chelsea and winning the Super Cup. We start in China, where China has accused U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and other American politicians of colluding with extremists and criminals. The Office of the Commissioner of Chinese Foreign Ministry in Hong Kong also said Pelosi and others had confused white and black and upheld double standards. The office said the Chinese people would fight any attempt to sabotage Hong Kong's stability and prosperity. The statement comes after Pelosi praised protesters and criticized Hong Kong police. Former U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton has also been accused of interfering in Hong Kong's affairs after she tweeted support for the protesters. Hong Kong police say over 700 people have been arrested since a series of protests began in June. They gave this update during a news conference on Thursday.
The Hong Kong International Airport is an important transport hub, catering to over 70 million passengers from around the world last year. The security and well-functioning of the airport is of vital importance to Hong Kong. The rule of law is the cornerstone of Hong Kong. As an interim injunction order is already in place, the police appeal to members of the public to respect to the order and refrain from any unlawful activities. The police also appeal to the protesters to stop any attacks on police station or any obstruction to our services. We hope everyone will join us in restoring law and order in the society.
The violent protests in Hong Kong have also been dominating the internet. Let's hear what the netizens have been saying on social media.
A tweet from former U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton in support of protesters in Hong Kong has been widely criticized by other Twitter users. Clinton's post called on her followers to stand in solidarity with the people of Hong Kong as they speak out for, quote, democracy and freedom from repression, unquote. But her critics have hit back, with one reply saying, no please. Last time you stood in solidarity with others, for example in Libya, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, all of them burned to the ground. Another poster from the U.S. expressed his criticism of Washington's intervention in other countries' affairs, calling on the U.S. to stay out of the situation. CNBC host Akiko Fuchita posted on her Twitter, quoting U.S. Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross, who said Hong Kong protests are an internal matter. Mr. Ross said, what are we gonna do? Invade Hong Kong? There are also many posts expressing support for the Hong Kong police. For example, this user on China's Weibo says that Hong Kong police have been working day and night for the peace and stability of the city and pays tribute to the officers. On Facebook, a netizen named Andrew Cole writes that more encouragement should be given to the officers because only they can hold the last line of defense. Ma Ke with Yang Zhao for CGTN.
A serious outbreak of malaria has reached epidemic proportions in Burundi, where it's affecting nearly half the population. Health officials in neighboring Uganda are also reporting a significant upsurge of up to 40% in malaria cases this year. The Ministry of Health says refugee influx, climate change, and a decline in the use of protective nets is attributing to the increase in the mosquito-borne disease. CGTN's Hilary Ayasega reports. Let's take a look.
Battling bouts of malaria, Derek Mayengo is among many patients here fighting the disease. A recent survey by Uganda's health ministry shows that malaria cases are up by 40%.
When I came in, one, as the heat was too much, two, a bit of joint pains, and then too much headache.
Children under the age of 5 are most vulnerable. Symptoms include high fever, nausea, vomiting, and headache, among others. This health facility receives on average 10 patients every day with symptoms of malaria. And after treatment, health workers here are encouraging them to use preventive methods such as sleeping under a mosquito net. Health officials say a general decline in the use of mosquito nets is just one reason for the increased numbers of people with malaria. Population growth and prolonged rains also help fuel the spread of the disease. The rains provide breeding ground for the mosquitoes that transmit the disease from one person to another.
The number of cases of malaria have increased by over 400,000 this year when compared with last year, from about 1 million cases in June 2018 to 1.4 million in June 2019.
Ugandan scientists plan to breed genetically modified mosquitoes as part of a plan to fight malaria in Africa. But that's a long-term solution. And for now, the health ministry says anti-malaria drugs, use of mosquito nets, and indoor spraying are the best available weapons to keep the killer disease at bay. Hilary Ayasega, CGTN, Kampala.
All right, joining me now is Dr. Apollo Ahimbisibwe. He is a medical director, Church Road Clinic in Kampala. Dr. Apollo, thank you for joining us here on Africa Live. Great to have you with us. First things first, cases of malaria were up by 40% in 2019. 40%. Burundi, too, is also experiencing unusually high levels of malaria. Why this sharp increase, doctor?
Thank you very much. There is a season that has changed because rain seasons usually come around June and December. But we have had a prolonged rain season from June, July, August, and we think it will also extend up to September. So we're still anticipating that there will be more malaria cases because of the changed rains that have affected the villages where more grass has been growing, more swamps that have water that is not draining. These are the breeding grounds of malaria mosquitoes that keep moving these parasites from one person to another. But also we know that we are in the Great Lakes region where there is a lot of instability, and we are getting people as refugees from neighboring countries like Congo and Sudan. But Uganda is the fourth most affected African country by malaria. It is led by Nigeria, followed by Congo and Mozambique. And you know the DR Congo is very unstable, and we are having a lot of refugees from DR Congo. So we think that the increased refugees that come into Uganda are also contributing a big proportion to the malaria incidences that are happening. So the prolonged seasons, the poor prevention methods, and the influx of refugees can be why we have a very big influx and incidences of malaria right now.
All right, doctor, let's pick up on what you've just said. You're saying that conditions allowing mosquitoes to thrive will continue until the beginning of September. I guess the question that really needs to be asked is what plans have been put in place to ensure no one dies of malaria? Doctor.
Malaria is not a new disease to Uganda. We have been having malaria, and we have measures that treat malaria. The only new thing right now is the increase of over 40%. So that is the biggest challenge. So when you have an increase of over 40%, it means it is going to put a health burden of finances on the health budget that has already been made. So you have 40% increase in malaria patients. That means a 40% increase in malaria drugs. That means a 40% burden on social problems in the family. That means a 40% increase in work absenteeism from the jobs. So it's a whole cycle of malaria problems. But right now what is being done is to raise the awareness. When you raise awareness, it's very important that everyone knows that we have a big problem at our hands. And so they will be cautious in everything they do. So the health ministry has taken a right path by first raising awareness. We are talking to villages, we are talking to communities, we are airing it out on radio stations, on TVs, telling people that right now we have a very big outbreak of malaria. You should be cautious. Number two is when they know that there is a big outbreak, they will seek medical advice. Because there is a mistake where you find that somebody has a fever and they decide to treat it at home instead of first going to the health centers to have investigations done. So when they know that any kind of fever could be malaria, then most of them will come into the health centers and make sure that they get the treatment that they deserve, that is appropriate. So when you make awareness and bring more people into the health centers, you've already started on the right path of the treatment. And many of them that we find with malaria will get the appropriate treatment. And when you get the appropriate treatment, you reduce on the morbidity and the mortality that would have been rather not attended to because of misinformation and poor awareness. So the health ministry is doing the right thing by raising awareness, but also we are starting to raise the prevention awareness apart from the treatment. We want these people to start using their nets again. Ugandan government gave out 26 million nets to communities, to people, the population for free. It was a free service. Mm-hmm. But when the incidences of the malaria go down, people start to either be complacent and feel like they don't need to use them anymore. So we have found that now probably there is a complacency in the population that we need to raise up and tell them, you know, the problem has not yet gone away. So we are trying the prevention and the treatment strategies concurrently.
All right, Doctor, thank you so much for your insight. Once again, we were talking to Dr. Apollo Bisibwe, talking to him live from Kampala. Doctor, thank you once again for your time. Moving on, South Sudan's rival parties will meet in Ethiopia next week in a bid to salvage the latest peace deal. The two leaders have 3 months left before the deadline to form a unity government elapses. The latest peace deal was signed between the warring parties last year in September. South Sudan collapsed into civil war in December 2013. Since then, its neighbors, through the regional body, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, have tried to stop the fighting. The body brokered the country's latest accord and says there is a lack of progress in tackling pending tasks of peace agreements. So what are the contentious issues that still need to be ironed out? CGTN's Robert Nagila reports, and he has more on that story. Let's take a look.
When South Sudan's President Salva Kiir signed a peace deal in 2018 with rebel leader Dr. Riek Machar in Addis Ababa, there was cautious optimism. A previous deal signed in 2015 collapsed a year later after clashes broke out between government forces and rebels. The latest deal, though, has been plagued with delays in the implementation of the agreement. A report by a panel of experts appointed by the UN Security Council stated the government appeared reluctant to share control of key parts of the political, security and economic landscape. While it's generally acknowledged that fighting has largely subsided, sporadic clashes in pockets of the country remain. A major stumbling block in the implementation of the agreement has been delays in the creation of a unified army, a lack of progress on security arrangements, and setting up of state boundaries. At independence in 2011, South Sudan had 10 states. After the signing of the 2015 peace agreement, President Salva Kiir increased the number of states to 28 and later to 32. The 5-year conflict has killed almost 400,000 people, displaced millions, and devastated the country's economy. And with both sides due back in Addis Ababa next week, there is renewed optimism that an agreement on the implementation of the deal can be reached. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
All right, for more on this, we are joined by Matthias Muindi, an independent political risk analyst based right here in Nairobi, specializing on the Horn of Africa and Great Lakes regions. Matthias Muindi, thank you for joining us here on Africa Live. Please, let's dig into this particular story. Activists say scant progress has been made since the agreement was signed 3 months ago. Will the transitional government, let me ask you, be formed in November and include all the signatories to this peace deal?
That has been the biggest question, because when you look at when the peace agreement was signed last year, they were given 6 months to form it. They never formed it. Then they met in May this year. They were given another 6 months to form it. 3 months down the line, they have not formed it. So the question is, are they willing to form that before November? It's highly unlikely. So what the regional governments under IGAD are likely going to do, they are most likely going to insist on a face-to-face meeting between President Kiir and the main rebel leader to thrash out any serious issue, because they need this transitional government formed before November. Otherwise, the country's stability risks, deteriorating further.
Right. Here's what really concerns me. Parties to the peace deal say its implementation will cost a whopping $285 million. Now, it's only around $10 million that's been provided so far. It seems that there's not much support for this process. From your perspective, how do you see it?
There is not there's a political support for this process, but the financial support is something which has been lagging behind. And that absence of financial support is one of the factors contributing to the poor implementation of that agreement. So what we could see is IGAD might insist some of the external actors in Sudan, especially the guarantors, Western guarantors of the peace agreement, to try to give some of this money to make sure some of the key elements of the agreement are implemented, especially security sector reform. That is the core issue, and that remains stagnant because of absence of finances.
Well, it seems that there's so many issues that seem to be unanswered. Another question that's lingering is from the Independent Boundaries Commission. They're yet to decide the number of states the country should have. Can you talk to us about that?
Absolutely. That's another core issue which has not been resolved. Before the war started, South Sudan had 10 administrative states. In the middle of the war, President Kiir created 32 more, and that became another cause of the conflict. There has been a long-standing difference between the two sides about that issue, and it's not going to be solved anytime soon, because the Boundary Commission, which is supposed to do that, recommended let's revert to the 10 states, but there's not been a sign-off to that proposal. So the issue of the administrative states is going to linger in the background, and it'll continue driving the resentment and possibly, the conflict in South Sudan in the near future.
I see. Well, so many questions, so little time. Matthias Muindi, thank you for joining us here on Africa Live. Hope to speak to you again really soon. You are watching Africa Live on CGTN. We've got a lot more stories coming your way. We've got your business news coming up, in fact. Here's a look at what's ahead. Global investors dump stocks amidst fears of a looming global recession. Businesses back on in Zimbabwe as power imports ease crippling shortages.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Let's take a look at the global economy now. The U.S. bond market moves point to possible recessions in major economies. The U.S. Central Bank has also come under renewed pressure from U.S. President Donald Trump for not doing enough to support the world's largest economy. Trump's administration delayed imposing a 10% tariff on certain Chinese products, including laptops and cell phones, beyond September on Tuesday, providing battered equity markets worldwide. Now, but most powerhouses are feeling the impact of global trade tensions.
Global stock markets around the world fell as concerns about the US-China trade war and the global economy prompted investors to dump shares. The three main US stock markets closed 3% lower overnight, while European stocks fell across the board as a shrinking German economy and weak industrial data from China stoked fears of a global slowdown, forcing investors to turn defensive and overshadowing a temporary US-China tariff truce. Asian stock markets also opened lower.
Well, I think you should take it very seriously. The bond market is rarely wrong, so I don't, like to bet against the bond market. I think the bond market's making a very clear statement right now, which is trade wars are horrible for the global economy, and Trump's America First policies are maybe good in some ways for America on the short term, but really bad for America and the global economy on the long term. And we're finally starting to see this roll over on top of all of the problems we're seeing between Hong Kong and then Brexit coming and the EU's economy being a disaster.
Weak data from Germany and China on Wednesday helped fuel a rush for safe assets like bonds and gold.
The shrinking of the German economy in the second quarter was somehow expected. It is no great surprise, but also no relief. We have to do something now. The German export nation is under attack, and we are not coming up with modern reform policies and infrastructural reforms in order to remain competitive in the long term.
The Frankfurt-dominated auto index fell more than 1%, while borrowing costs in Germany fell to fresh record lows following the GDP data, reinforcing expectations for monetary policy stimulus soon. Market participants are now keeping watch for a readout of second quarter GDP numbers in the Eurozone due later in the day. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
In a developing story, Simon Rudland, co-owner of Gold Leaf Tobacco Corporation and a member of Fair Trade Independent Tobacco Association, has been seriously injured in an alleged assassination attempt in Johannesburg. FITA chairperson Sina Nhlanhla Mnguni confirmed the Wednesday morning shooting. Reports say two assailants in a white car waited at the offices of FITA in Norwood, Johannesburg, as Rudland and his lawyer arrived for a meeting. One man fired 9 shots with a handgun at Rudland's head. One bullet struck him in the neck. He has since been hospitalized and is being kept in intensive care. The source said the suspects have been identified by way of CCTV. Well, businesses in Zimbabwe have begun enjoying more regular electricity supplies following an increase of imports from South Africa. At the moment, the southern African country is receiving an additional 400 megawatts per week from Eskom as it tries to ease its crippling power crises. With the details, here is CGTN's Farai Wakatuya.
3 days of continuous power have put this flour milling plant back in business. Its owner has his fingers crossed the situation holds.
We are happy that the power is back. We saw improvement as from Saturday last week, and the food production is now commenced. However, the losses of the past 8 weeks will probably require us to work in order to recover a full throttle for the next 8 months, to recover from the 8 weeks. This is in respect of outstanding orders that we had, the fixed costs that we incurred during that time, the labor that we had to pay whilst workers remained idle.
Elsewhere, small businesses that were working by night to beat the load shedding are enjoying a return to relative normalcy.
This period has been abnormal. We are solely dependent on electricity. If it's not available, we can't work. So we are happy that there are deals in place to secure more power.
But the situation remains precarious, as dangerous as these makeshift connections. So any extra hours of power are a big deal, not just for the individual businesses, but for an economy encountering several headwinds.
Food industry, just like anywhere else in the world, is a volumes game. We have to produce high volumes so that there is more than what demand requires, and the unit cost becomes lower. So when we have a situation of low productivity, it impacts on the food supply itself, and further impacts also on food prices.
The government says it's negotiating for more imports, which it's relying on until depleted water levels at the main hydropower station in Kariba are replenished after the next rainy season. In the long term, it plans to accelerate the implementation of new power projects as well as the refurbishment of existing ones to bring them back up to full capacity in order to avert the recurrence of a similar crisis. Farang Makutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
You're watching Africa Live on CGTN. We've got your sports news coming up after the break. Don't touch that dial. Here's what's ahead. In sports, Liverpool add on to their UEFA Champions League title by beating Chelsea and winning the Super Cup.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout, for every step of the way. Match Point, only on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Let's talk a bit of football, and we begin with European football, where Senegal's Sadio Mane and Egypt's Mohamed Salah were instrumental as Liverpool beat Chelsea to win the UEFA Super Cup. Chelsea broke the deadlock in the 36th minute through Oliver Giroud. 2 minutes after the break, Sadio Mane leveled the scoring. The game ended 1-1, and the match went into extra time where Mane scored to give the Reds a 2-1 lead. Chelsea fought back and were awarded a penalty that Jorginho converted, forcing the game into penalties. Both sides scored their first 4 penalties. Salah then scored the 5th for Liverpool to put pressure on the Blues. Tammy Abraham stepped up, but his spot kick was saved by Adrian.
I don't know where Adrian was 2 weeks ago when we played Man City. When I spoke to him first time, he told me, yes, I had a goalie coach and stuff like this, so it was clear he will need time to get fit. But we didn't have that time, so he has to be fit now, and he was fit.